Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm joined by Colin Watt to look at Celtic's Team of the Decade. Colin, talk to us about the series of Decade of Dominance awards that you've been running on A Celtic State of Mind.
It's clear that over the last decade we have been the dominant force of Scottish football, despite what the mainstream media or some other teams would want you to believe. But Celtic have really dominated since Neil Lennon took over, right through to the period we're on now, and hopefully for the next sustained period ahead we will continue to win trophy after trophy after trophy. And what we want to do now is take a look back over that period, take a look back at some of the great memories that we've had, some of the great successes, some of the great players that we've had, and start to recognise them, because this is something that we'll look back on in 30 or 40 years' time, and we'll call the sort of period between 2010 and 2020 the Decade of Dominance. So today we are going to take a look at some of the players that have showcased their talents throughout this Decade of Dominance, and we're going to pick our goalkeeper, defender, midfielder and striker of the decade, and these players will actually automatically win their place in the Team of the Decade, which will come out later on, where we can fill in the rest of the gaps. But this is your chance to secure your favourite's place in the Team of the Decade.
Now, you've already gone through the process of establishing Celtic State of Mind's greatest cult hero team, and you've also established ACSOM's greatest team of the 1950s. So there will be a series of votes going through the 60s, 70s, right up to the present day as well. But what we're looking at the moment is the last 10 years, where Celtic have obviously won 9 titles out of 10, and we continue to dominate the Scottish game. Let's start off with the goalkeepers that we have enjoyed or otherwise watching at Celtic Park. Colin, talk us through the 4 nominees.
So we've got 4 nominees here, 2 real stickouts, 2 that have sort of added value as well. But let's start with our current number 1, Fraser Forster. So Fraser's made 236 appearances for Celtic, 118 clean sheets in that time. That's a 1-2 record, which is not to be sniffed at for sure. And I'd say probably his most memorable moment in that period of time that he's been here, well, apart from the fact that he actually holds a record, Paul, I believe, for being the only player to sign for Celtic 4 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's got to be that night when Celtic beat Barcelona, the best team in the world at that point, and Fraser Forster made some incredible saves that night. It was actually on BT Sport the other day, and watching it again, it was just fantastic. He single-handedly has won us so many games over his period in goals for Celtic.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the first performance that springs to mind is the Barcelona performance. But then you just look at last season, Colin, with his performances against the likes of Lazio and Rangers in the League Cup final. The Spanish called him Le Gran Muralla, and when they call your goalkeeper the Great Wall, then I think that speaks volumes. And you're looking at his goals conceded against games statistic there as well. I think what we probably find when we look through goalkeepers is Celtic goalies normally do have a percentage rate similar to Forster's, and that I think is due to the fact that certainly domestically, Colin, we do dominate most teams in most games. I think I've mentioned this previously in various podcasts, Colin. I believe that Fraser Forster has been Neil Lennon's greatest signing of his second spell in charge at Celtic, and it's going to take a really special performance to outvote Fraser Forster. Who's number 2 on your list?
So number 2 is another very reasonable candidate for this award. It is Craig Gordon. Craig Gordon, 242 appearances for Celtic, 121 clean sheets. Again, a 1-2 record, just like we were discussing. And to be fair to Craig, the fact that he came back from such a horrible injury that he had, it was potentially career-ending, and he came back and he made a real impact under Ronnie Dyler. And he was a mainstay throughout the Invincible treble team and beyond. And to be honest, he's still a very, very reliable backup right now. And he's probably a goalkeeper that's still got another couple of years in him. So who knows, he could still be here for a while to come. But that image of him collapsing onto his knees as Tom Rogic scores the winning goal in the 2017 Scottish Cup final, that's one of those moments that will get played for years and years and years to come when we look at the success of this period.
It's cinematic, isn't it? You've got the slow motion, the rain, the thunder, the lightning, the goal going in, the celebration, and then Gordon falling to his knees. It definitely is cinematic. And I think when you look back on Gordon, he was brought in to replace Fraser Forster. That was the unusual thing, and he was brought in, certainly the contract talks etc. had began prior to the appointment of Ronnie Dyler. So it's one of these signings that the club made in between managers, comes in really no risk if you think about it, and that sounds unusual because he'd been out the game for 2 years, but we weren't paying for Craig Gordon when he came in. And he quickly established himself as a number one. I think when Rodgers came in, Colin, that he had to prove himself again, because Rodgers made it quite clear that he liked his goalkeepers to play out from the back. He brought in his own man in Dorus de Vries, who did not impress at all, and obviously ended up as a number two. And we've mentioned before, if you're a number two at Celtic in the goalkeeper position, you could spend most of your career there. The old Zaluska effect, season after season, as backup to Boruc. Now, I think the big question for me would be looking at next season. Craig Gordon is on a big contract at the insistence of Brendan Rodgers when Chelsea were looking to sign him for £7 million, and he was given an improved deal at that stage. And the question would be, I think I totally agree with you, he's got the fitness and he certainly has the ability to go on for another few years. We all know goalkeepers play or invariably can play longer than outfield players just by the very nature of the impact, obviously, to their knees, etc., being less than it would be for a Scott Brown, even though he looks to be playing up into his late 30s as well. Will Gordon be the number one next season? That's a big question, because it all depends on whether or not we can secure the services of Fraser Forster for a fifth time. So Craig Gordon is the second on the list. Who is number three?
Well, it's funny you actually just mentioned this man. It's Lucas Zaluska. For all the time that he was at Celtic, he only made 50 appearances with 23 clean sheets. Again, a sort of 1-2 record. And he was pretty much just a backup goalkeeper. But if you look at that period, he outlasts a lot of the other backup goalkeepers that made it through. And he certainly did have his moments.
Up in Ashton Lane. He had a moment up in Ashton Lane, didn't he?
Yeah, apparently the police don't let us talk about that moment. The moment I was first thinking of before you mentioned that was the game against Rangers at Ibrox, the game that effectually became the Bruni Cup tie. He comes on to replace Foster, who was sent off. Yeah. And at 2-1, he kept us in that game until we eventually got it back level. And again, in the replay, he pulled off a number of saves for us to get through to that tie. But he just never had that ability. I don't think that he could ever be called upon as a number one. I know he was number one at Dundee United for a period of time, but you think he just hit that level and he could never make the step up for Celtic.
It really is an interesting point, because there have been so many players that have been bought from Scottish sides, Colin, and they've been able to adapt and flourish. And, just recently, players like Scott McDonald, for example, Barry Robson, they come into the side, they make an impact. Paul Hartley being another one, Craig Gordon, who we've already spoke about. But through the ages, that has been the case. On the flip side of that, there's players who really, really star for a fellow Scottish Premier League club. They come into Celtic and it just doesn't happen. I've spoken to a few players who basically say that the step up is just too big. You look at the likes of Scott Allen. Scott Allen was an absolutely brilliant midfield player for Hibs. We bring him in, can't get a game. And people might say, well, we only brought him in so that Rangers couldn't buy him. But there's been so many examples of that. The Axon Video Club last Sunday there was the Celtic Diary, which was meant to be a regular Celtic diary to keep us updated on the goings-on at Celtic Park. It was an idea we had already dipped our toe in with the Celtic collection in the early 90s. But in that particular campaign, this was Tommy Burns' last season in charge, we bring in Paolo Di Canio, we bring in Alan Stubbs, big money buys, but we also brought in David Hanna. Now at that time, David Hanna was one of the best Scottish midfield players in the league. We bring him in, and I don't think anybody's going to disagree with this, he was just a bit part player for his entire career. Didn't really impress. So it takes a special type of player to then make that step up, The other ones, you can scoff and gnash your teeth. Nadir Chifchi, outside of Celtic, was one of the best players in Scotland. You know, he was scoring 20-odd goals for a Dundee United side. So he comes to Celtic and he looks like a completely different player entirely. And I think Zaluska, when you come in, as you say, very capable, Polish internationalist, but it takes a special type to make that step up. Who is the fourth goalkeeper that our listeners will be able to vote for?
So the fourth goalkeeper is another one of the current squad and potentially a number one for us next season. It's Scott Bain. So Scott Bain, having made 46 appearances, has 28 clean sheets for Celtic. So it's about almost a 3 out of 4 record there. To be fair to Scott Bain, he's always been a player I thought quite highly of, even through his time at Dundee. I always thought that there was more to come from Scott Bain, and I certainly think since he's joined Celtic that his ability has certainly improved. And it has to be said for all of these goalkeepers that the work that they've went through with the coaching staff at Celtic Park certainly made them better players, and Stevie Woods has been probably one of the best signings Celtic's ever made in that department, and he's brought on the careers of so many of the goalkeepers, even ones that have went on to have careers down south as well. But Scott Bain, I think he's still only 28, 29. He could play for another 10 or 11 years for Celtic. He has that ability to learn from guys like Gordon and Foster at the minute and develop his game even more. And even when he made his debut, he was the third choice goalkeeper to come in. Injuries to Gordon and De Vries. He comes in at Ibrox. Okay, a shaky start, but he made some incredible saves, and he continued the record that means that Alfredo Morelos has never scored against us.
When you look at Bain, you've got to consider that he's about 10 years younger than Craig Gordon. So it's not as though time is running out for Scott Bain. I always remember when he signed as well, and again, this is me because I'm old-fashioned and I'm a traditionalist in certain aspects of my life. And I always think back to that brilliant picture when Pat Stanton signed for Celtic and he's got the beautiful suit and the blazer, shirt and tie, looks tremendous, and he's being introduced to his new teammates in the Celtic dressing room who, not contrived whatsoever, are all kitted out. You know what I mean? It's probably a Tuesday afternoon or something. But for the press photographs. And then you see guys like Lee Griffiths signing for Celtic and Scott Bain. And it's like they turn up in their overalls because they've just done a shift, you know what I mean? And they just turn up to sign. And Scott Bain's was one of them. But I do like the fact that he wears short sleeves goalkeeper tops because it reminds me of the likes of Campos. Remember Campos? The guy that wore the loud goalie jerseys, the Mexican goalie.
It's funny you say that because I've heard that the retail division aren't very happy at him wearing that because they don't sell short sleeve goalkeeper tops.
And do they get requests for it?
They get quite a bit of requests for it now because that's what he does.
Oh, brilliant. We were just talking with Paul Lamb about modifications of jerseys, the famous one being Craig Bellamy, who used to just cut the collars off because he didn't like them. It probably made them more aerodynamic and it worked. But I remember talking about Scott Bain to Rab Douglas, who had worked with him up in Dundee, and he rated him really, really highly. And I think, you know, if you look at Bain and Gordon, let's be honest, we've got two Scottish internationalist goalkeepers as backup to Fraser Forster. I would much rather have big Fraser Forster as a number one. But it would be worthwhile to see how the other two go next season. I don't think it's an area of the squad that we really need to do some kind of immediate work on. However, Alan Morrison might tell us different, because when you look at Forster's performances in some of the big games, Colin, he has been the difference between a victory and a loss. So Scott Bain makes up the four goalkeepers who could be voted for the goalkeeper of the decade. Just as a point, who would get your vote?
I think it's very, very close, but for his performances and probably the games that he's won for Celtic, I would go with Fraser Forster.
I would go for Forster as well, and it's an immediate decision for me. And, you know, it's based on his entire career over his time at Celtic, over 4 different spells. I know that some of the loans were ran back to back, but yeah, without a doubt, Fraser Forster. We've also had some outstanding defenders in that time as well, and we're going to be looking through 4 such defenders that have been picked out for the vote. And we'll start off with a fairly obvious one, Virgil van Dijk. Talk to me about the big man.
So 115 appearances for Celtic, 15 goals. What can you say about Virgil van Dijk that's not already been said before? Absolutely outstanding player. I think after maybe 3 or 4 months at Celtic, he knew it was too easy for him. He cantered through games. I don't think he broke sweat most of the time. I remember the game against Rangers at the semi-final at Hampdens, and he goes strolling forward and just nudges Rangers players out the road, puts them on the deck as if they're not there. And that's just how easy Scottish football was for him. He deserved his move when he did go. We were only a stepping stone for him, and when you see a player of that ability, there's just sometimes you just can't deny him the fact that he wants to go on and win some great things in his career. And Champions League winner, second place in the Ballon d'Or, it's the only way he's up for Virgil. And who knows, maybe one day he'll decide that he wants to come back and finish his career here, and he'll be certainly more than welcome.
You said there would be no denying, and actually one of the players that for me has been one of our finest defenders as a partnership was his defensive partner, Jason Denayer. And I thought, that the argument I think that's been made is that Virgil made him a better player. Perhaps he did, but I think Denayer and Van Dijk has been in modern times our finest partnership at centre half without a doubt. And obviously we've now got a good partnership in my opinion with Julian and Dyer, and I think Alan Morrison's stats would back that up as well. There comes a point, Colin, and you're saying you can be no denying a player moving on. You're right, because there comes a point, if someone reaches a point in their own development where if they don't step up again, and Celtic are maybe being knocked out of Europe early doors, which was the case under Ronnie Deila, where he played 2 years of his career at Celtic, then there's always that risk that the player might regress. It's a very short career, and you can't, spend time at a club for a year and a half not play. One of the points would be someone like, let's say, Scott Allen. You come to Celtic, you don't kick a ball, virtually, and then you end up going back to where you came from, probably to play out the rest of his career in Scotland. So there is that fear, I think, in players' minds, especially the ambitious players like Virgil van Dijk, of regression, and you don't want to do that. He's now the Dutch captain. We've got a massive sell-on percentage from his deal when he went to Liverpool. He knew what he wanted. He virtually went on strike at Southampton to get his big move. And, this is a very, very much a modern day player. I'm not going to call him a mercenary. I think he says a lot of good things about Celtic. But then, you're absolutely right. You realise quite soon after he signed and after watching him that he was one of these guys who was going to move on. But that's down to the player as well. There's been so many guys we've brought in, and we've offered them the same platform, Colin, the same training facilities, the same club, the same European aspirations, and they failed to deliver. So, the credit's got to go down to the player. I see him taking yet another step up, because I don't think English football is the best league in the world. They will tell you otherwise. I can see him ending up playing in Spain for one of the big two there as well. He can play anywhere. He's absolute class. And after Virgil, who is number 2 in the defenders list?
So we mentioned about players that move on to develop their careers, and I'll probably argue against my own point here with the second one, but our second choice is Kieran Tierney. 170 appearances and 8 goals. A Celtic fan from day dot, making his debut at 17, and then for the next 4 years basically making that left-back position his own. You've got to remember as well, he actually replaced someone who was pretty much a mainstay at left-back in Emilio Izagirre, and until his unfortunate injury was one of the best players in Scotland. In fact, he won the Player of the Year award. So it was big boots for him to step into, but Tierney did, and he was one of the best players for Celtic over that period. Certainly when Rodgers came in, the partnership he seemed to have with Paddy Roberts was brilliant. When I mentioned about players making a stepping stone, I never thought Kieran Tierney would see Celtic as a stepping stone, purely because of how much he played on that Celtic was his boyhood team, and if with everything that's going on at Celtic at the moment, the push for 10 in a row, this sort of thing that will maybe never be eclipsed again, this decade of dominance that we've had, and him still being so young, I feel as if there was still a chapter of his Celtic career that he never got the chance to write, and he moved on, and who knows what's going to happen to him down south. He's certainly not had the best start with injuries, but he is a player with unbelievable talent, and hopefully he has a good career.
Well, he had what would be described as a Celtic state of mind, Colin, which has made its way into common parlance in relation to describing a Celtic supporter or one of that ilk. And who knows, one of these days it might even be a lyric in a song, Colin. Watch this space. But I remember asking Danny McGrain about Tierney, and Danny responded with his usual, what are you asking me for? It's Kieran's decision, right? But then he said, at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that it's a short career. Danny said that at no point did Arsenal come in for him during his career, so he can't say he would have or would not have gone himself, Danny. But he wished Kieran all the best because it's a short career, and that particular offer may not have been available. You look at one of the articles that was written this week on a CelticStateOfMind.net by Martin Donaldson, who wrote an article about the one and only Jimmy Johnstone. At one point he's mentioning the clubs who were chasing Jinky, and he mentions Real Madrid, he mentions Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur. And obviously there was a big bid that came in from AC Milan at one point of 100 grand, which famously was met with the quip from Jock Stein, which game do you want him for? And when it came to the point when Jimmy Johnstone was leaving Celtic, so when Jimmy Johnstone had finally left Celtic at 30, you look at the opportunities that were available. Now, this is a guy who had been named third in the Ballon d'Or in 1967, someone who had been chased by all the greats from around the world, Colin, and he was a worldwide name, and the opportunities weren't there. The same opportunities weren't there, and footballers need to consider that themselves. I was hugely disappointed when Kieran Tierney left. I wasn't particularly disappointed with him because there's so many different facets to a footballer leaving a football club. I think one of them would have been what I would describe as the Brendan Rodgers effect. Brendan Rodgers instilled a certain way of thinking amongst players, and I think Rodgers works better with young players who he can create an ideal in their minds rather than maybe senior pros who might not be able to change their ways. And I think Rodgers turned Tierney's head, made him think differently. The world doesn't revolve around Celtic, obviously, in Brendan Rodgers' mind. And I think there was an element of that fed into Kieran Tierney's attitude, and his attitude may have changed as well, Colin. You say about his journey and his Celtic story, again, it all comes down to the player. Virgil van Dijk goes to Southampton and he makes it happen himself. At the moment, Tierney's not made it happen in England, but it's all down to him. If he ever comes back to Celtic, that's probably because he's been a failure, because we're not going to sign a player for £30 million, £25 million. If he goes on and kicks on and performs, then he will get a move to another English club or elsewhere. You know, I loved his relationship they had with Paddy Roberts. I do think we'll see Paddy Roberts back in the green and white hoops, in actual fact. And finally, the point you made about Izagiri with the injury, it was so unfortunate because he was, at that point, he was the kind of guy that Man United were watching, you know, Izagiri. And it puts me in mind of the injury that Agat got against Hearts. You know, Agat lost something that day, and I think Izagiri lost something when he broke down as well. So, very unfortunate. Kieran Tierney may get less votes than he would have done at the time of him actually playing for Celtic because he was a real fan's favourite. And who's number 3 in the list?
Oh, interestingly, it's another fan's favourite, and it's one of these players that's came over from another country to Celtic and left with Celtic in their hearts. Absolutely understood what the club meant, what the fans meant. It is the mad Swede Mikael Lustig. He's had so many memorable appearances over his 273 games, 21 goals, including that one up at Pittodrie last season, which basically secured the title. His last touch for Celtic was to set up Edward for the treble winning goal. He scored the 5th goal at Ibrox. He had the Rabona assist against St Johnstone, and he became PC Lustig at Celtic Park. He was an absolute fan's favourite, and to be honest, I was quite disappointed to see him leave the club at the start of this season. I thought he was still someone that maybe if he didn't offer it on the park, he could still offer it as part of the dressing room. He seemed to have a great friendship with the likes of Scott Brown, and for those players that are coming in, he could really help embed within them what Celtic was all about, because he was someone that absolutely got it.
Exactly, and he was a winner. This is the big thing I always say about Lustig. He was a winner at Celtic. He didn't know defeat. Every season he played at Celtic, he won the league. He was an invincible before he signed. He became an invincible again at Celtic Park. And like you say, the affinity that he had, Colin, with the fans is akin to the kind of affinity that you have with a cult player. But you couldn't call Lustig cult because, you know, this is a guy who won about 100 caps for Sweden and played at World Cups, and he was just a fantastic player. I think what kind of happened maybe in the last 18 months of his Celtic career was the mobility was an issue, wasn't it? Getting up and down that line. Almost as if he had an issue with his hips, just the way he was running. I'm no specialist. Alan Morrison agrees with you. We should have kept him. And Alan's argument is that he would have fitted in, even as backup, for 2 different positions, right back and centre half. And there's also, you know, been an issue at right back because El Hamid has had, you know, serious injury problems this season. I think he's a class player, Colin, but he's been injured a fair bit. Frimpong came on, you know, burst onto the scene, but he's more of an offensive player, you know, than a defensive player. And I know in the greatest traditions at Celtic with the full-backs overlapping, that's maybe a good thing for the boy. But I think having kept him to cover the 2 positions would have been a good idea. But it all comes down, I guess, to the contract as well, what he was wanting against what Celtic were going to offer. I loved his celebration when he scored against Rangers and the top went over the head. It was like the Turin Shroud, I think it was described as by our poet Kevin Graham. And the dance, of course, I hate contrived celebrations. I like emotion. You know, the first time Bruni done the Bruni was natural. Every time after that's been contrived because, you know, he's playing up to the crowd. I don't like when you think of some of the things they do down south, and there was a thing that Paul Ince and Ryan Giggs used to do after they scored, and it was basically set up, and you're looking at them thinking, these guys are in their 20s, Colin. They've practiced that. They've either practiced it at the training ground or at home, and that's pretty sad. I just like people like Tardelli when he scores for Italy, or Proven when he scores that free kick against Dundee United. The natural passion that you show after scoring a goal is what I like to see. But obviously, Lustig did his wee dance, didn't he? Pretended he was playing a keyboard in some kind of dance remix. It's just a contrived nature. It's a goal. That's what football is about, scoring that goal. In that moment, you know, that old question that they used to ask, what's better, scoring a goal or having sex? And people were like, scoring a goal. You know, I remember Chris Waddle saying, no, it definitely isn't better than having sex. But it's that natural reaction to scoring a goal. And, you know, if you've got something all set up, I'm just like, nah, no time for that, personally. But, you know, if it works for some people, it's entertainment at the end of the day. And the fourth defender on the list.
Yep, so our fourth defender, well, he's again someone who's made multiple signings for Celtic. He left and came back. He is the prodigal son. He's Charlie Mulgrew. So 207 appearances and 28 goals. And part of Mulgrew's sort of likeliness with the Celtic fans was his capability to play in a number of positions. He was a complete utility player. Anywhere across the back line, I'm pretty sure Charlie Mulgrew had played for Celtic at some point. I know certainly when he was at Aberdeen, he had to go in goals for one game when the goalkeeper gets sent off and the subs had all been made. He was a fan's favourite for a long period of time, and certainly under Neil Lennon, he made some great performances. That game at Rugby Park that saved Neil Lennon's career, Charlie Mulgrew turned that game round, and he was certainly one of the kind of key driving forces when Lennon lifted the title. If we go back to Rugby Park, basically, I don't know, I think it was like 7 months later when we won 6-0 to secure the title that day. He assists 2, he scores 2, and he's certainly man of the match. And he was always probably one of the first names on Neil Lennon's team sheet. Unfortunately, I think he kind of soured his relationship with some Celtic fans in the sort of period just before he left. That game against Ajax where he kind of stumbles off when we're trying to push for an equaliser to stay in Europe, when we're already down to we've used the subs and we're now down to 10 men. I think that sort of annoyed quite a few people, but looking over his whole period at Celtic, he was certainly Mr. Reliable, and certainly worth inclusion within this poll.
Neil Lennon's first signing, as you say, he was a very, very influential player, and I think the fact that he was an influential senior player in the changing room under Ronnie Dyler probably soured the issues as well nearer the end of his career, because obviously as soon as Rodgers comes in, players like Charlie Mulgrew and Chris Commons are surplus to requirements, never ever played under Rodgers, and in fact Charlie Mulgrew was shipped out with his movie star looks, and he used to be called Chaz when he first signed for Celtic as a 12-year-old, Chaz Mulgrew. I prefer his Sunday name, Charles Patrick Mulgrew, and he's one of the guys that I would like to see him back at Celtic Park as part of the backroom team at some point. I think there is always merit in bringing somebody in who has the club, just bleeding through them, and he was there as a young boy for years before Strachan shipped him off, and then he came back and he had the career that he probably dreamed of as a kid. So he's one of the boys I'd like to see back, obviously, if he's got the ability to be a coach, back in at Celtic, so that he can impart that knowledge and the traditions of Celtic Football Club to young players coming through, Colin. So he will be the fourth. If you were to choose a defender from that list of 4, who would it be?
I mean, there's very good candidates here, and I think I know who the obvious choice would be, but as I said at the start of this is to guarantee your place within the team of the decade, and to do so I would probably pick Mikael Lustig. Mr. Reliable, he understood what Celtic meant. And as you said, he was a winner. And I want my team of the decade of dominance to be full of winners. So the right back spot goes to Mikael Lustig. Although there's a good chance that all 4 of these players might end up in the eventual team because they could all play in different positions.
I'm going to go for Virgil van Dijk because we shared the front cover of a Celtic View together. We've got a wee bond in that. Virgil, for me, is the finest defender I've ever watched in the flesh in the green and white hoops, so he would definitely get my vote. We move on to the midfield, and I think the first choice of midfielder is the one and only Scott Brown.
It is indeed. 566 appearances, 45 goals. I was quite taken aback by the fact the amount of goals he scores. You don't really recognise that, but he's been here about 13 or 14 years now, so he's kind of chipping in with 3 or 4 goals a season, and he's now lifted a trophy above his head 19 times as Celtic captain. That's just an outstanding stat. He'll go on and play over 600 games for Celtic. He'll probably score 50 goals. What can be said about Scott Brown that's not already been said before? Every time someone comes and writes him off, he just goes and proves them wrong. And we could still be talking in 2 or 3 years' time about our captain Scott Brown lifting 12 or 13 in a row.
Yeah, and I think and I've made this point a few times, his career at Celtic for me, and I know that it was enhanced for a period under Brendan Rodgers, but his career really started to improve, and we started seeing the player that we knew was in Scott Brown when we signed him for what was big money at the time under Neil Lennon in his first spell. I think Lennon doesn't get the credit that he's due in relation to his man management skills. I think he's been a huge influence on Scott Brown. And we like trebles at Celtic Park. Scott Brown is hated by most of Scottish football, as is his manager Neil Lennon, and as is the CEO Peter Lawwell. There's a few reasons why that hatred is there. A big reason behind it is success. I remember seeing some of the official outlets, for example, St Johnstone last season, going on about a scathing tackle, yet another scathing tackle by Scott Brown. I mean, it's almost as if it's fair game to say what you like. You've got people saying that Peter Lawwell runs Scottish football. You've got Neil Lennon getting death threats and getting attacked in the street. And you've got clubs, managers, captains, all saying what they like about Scott Brown. And I think the biggest reason for that is success. There's other reasons why Neil Lennon has had the flack that he's had over the years, but Scott Brown has taken a lot of flack on the chin as the Celtic talisman. And I'm like yourself, I think he'll go on. I think he's still got about 3 seasons in him, Colin. And another one that I would like to see retained at Celtic Park, there's always this thing, you've got to go back and think to yourself, did you see Neil Lennon as a manager at Celtic? You know, when he was a player, did you think, there's a manager in him?
Probably didn't. I know he's obviously had that influential period as a captain, but you sort of wonder when you look at a player, what sort of style of football do they like? If you've been honest and you've watched the way that Neil Lennon played football, and this is actually captured very well in the scouting notes that Jose Mourinho and his assistant took for the UEFA Cup final. The pass that Neil Lennon loved was sideways or backways. There was very irregular forward passes from Neil Lennon. And if that was the style of football he was going to introduce, then that's not the kind of style I'd like to have watched at Celtic Park. But he's the total opposite. As a manager at Celtic, he's all about getting the ball forward, getting the ball in the box, and creating as many chances as possible, literally putting as much pressure on the defence and the goalkeeper as possible. And it's totally different from the way that Neil Lennon played football. He scored 3 goals for Celtic. That was it.
The reason I asked that is I have spoken to some of his teammates who didn't see a manager in him, and people might think the same about Scott Brown. However, I just think there's a leadership quality that nobody can teach you. There's a leadership quality that no manual, Colin, is going to make you a leader. You've got it or you don't. And Scott Brown has that, and that's why he's a captain of Celtic Football Club. And that's why I think he'll be retained even when his career comes to an end at Celtic. And, let's be honest, I think we'd all like to see him as part and parcel of that backroom team. Now, you're going to be spoilt for choice here, but who is going to be number 2 in the list of midfielders of the decade?
So, number 2, someone again that's been here best part of 10 years. I think he's in his 11th season now at the club, is James Forrest. 395 appearances, 89 goals. He's a player that for me, as long as he stays, and I think he will stay now, I think he's set to be a one-club player. He'll go on and make 500 appearances for Celtic easily. He'll score 100 goals, and he'll definitely be one of the list of current-day superstars that Celtic have had. When you think back to the 60s and you think back to the Lisbon Lions, you go to the 80s with the likes of Charlie Nicholas, and you go into the 90s and bring in the likes of Larsson, into Martin O'Neill's era, Sutton, Hartson, Lambert. This is a player that we'll look back on as one of those players that when you look back at that decade, this is a player you remember. And James Forrest, he's again proven people wrong throughout his whole career. Came back from basically the brink where it looked as if he was going to depart Celtic under Ronnie Dyler, and under Brendan Rodgers found a complete new lease of life. And I think he scored something like best part of 50 goals over the last 3 seasons. And if he continues like this, then he's certainly going to be one of the players that's going to be key for us as we go to 10 and beyond.
He's a legend. It's that simple, and I don't think there's any doubt in that. He's going to score 100 goals for Celtic plus and make over 500 appearances. A very select few players in history of Celtic Football Club have made more than 500 appearances. Only 12 in the club's history. James Forrest will get into that list. And I think, after he stopped going on nights out with Anthony Stokes, things got better for him. But he was another player who, Neil Lennon introduced him to the Celtic side, Colin, and has been a huge influence in James Forrest's career. But it was interesting when we spoke to Joe Donnelly for the podcast a few weeks ago. Joe obviously wrote the book Homegrown Hero, the autobiography of, I say it's an autobiography, but obviously players don't write their own books, very rarely. Joe wrote the book for James, and he said that he was still unsure whether or not Neil Lennon liked him. I find that brilliant. The guy's not got the big head, he's not got that kind of attitude. The ego, I think, and the big thing that Alan Morrison continually brings up is the amount of assists that James Forrest has to his credit as well. So yeah, this is looking like a tough vote. Who's number 3 on your list for midfielder of the decade?
Number 3 would have got a few more votes if it wasn't for his comments in the press the last few days. But we're looking at Chris Commons, an absolute bargain of a signing at 300,000. That itself can't be denied. 227 appearances and 91 goals. For me, he is his catalyst of his own downfall at Celtic. He should have had 100 goals plus. He was that perfect player to play off the lone striker because he linked up the play. He took a shot when it was on. He brought us back from games where he looked as if we were down and out. He was always looking to sort of get the ball forward and drive. He was a great attacking player. But I think his temperament and his attitude cost him not only appearances but certainly goals for Celtic. And when you get into that 100 goals club, then you go down as one of the better players to have played for Celtic. Maybe with the way that he now reacts to Celtic, especially when he's working for Sky and when he's working with the press. I think quite a few Celtic fans will be happy to the fact that he's not in that club. Which is a shame because he was a great player for us when he was on his game.
I remember having a conversation actually with Kevin McKenna, who has appeared on a Celtic State of Mind, but Kevin was the editor of my debut book, The Quality Street Gang, and I learnt a lot from him from a writing perspective. Anyone who's read Kevin McKenna's work, particularly from a political angle, will realise just how talented a writer he is. And he basically said that, you've got all these cheerleaders for Rangers. You do have all these cheerleaders for Rangers because the discussion was around the fact that Andy Walker wasn't welcome at Celtic Park. And I found that quite sad because, and that wasn't Kevin McKenna's opinion, by the way, it was just that was the fact at that time. And I found it sad because I think of Andy Walker as a centenary hero. He came in as a young boy into the centenary team, top goal scorer. So he outscored the likes of Frank McAvenny, who, was the flamboyant fans' favourite. But Walker scored 30 odd goals that season. He never really got back to that level at Celtic. But he had 2 spells at the club. And obviously it's his punditry career that Celtic fans seem to kind of judge him by. And it's the same with Charlie Nicholas. Charlie Nicholas was an absolute revelation in his first spell at Celtic. He had a good season in his second spell as well when he came back, slightly older as a veteran after years at Arsenal and Aberdeen. And the same things happened, I think, with Chris Commons, Colin. I think you're right. And when you're coming out with things that are unbalanced, we're not expecting players to be cheerleaders. People are cheerleaders for Ibrox because they want to have the blazer. They want to be welcomed in at that club. And that's fine because it's laughable. And I think the best example of that was when Chris Sutton completely destroyed Derek Johnson on live radio, and he didn't have any comeback. You've got to have balance. And if someone's coming away in the media and making comments and trying to make points and there's no balance, then it gets to that point where your respect for them does wane. So when we're talking about Chris Commons, there's going to be most of the listeners to AXOM are going to be thinking of not just the player. It's going to come into their mind, the actual punditry and the comments that have been made. And that's unfortunate for him because, there was certain periods of time at Celtic where he was a fantastic player. And as you say, a total bargain at 300 grand. He always looked that wee bit overweight, didn't really look like the modern day elite player, always carrying a bit of weight. But I think his reputation was soiled under Ronnie Deila. There was obviously the toys out the pram moment when he was substituted against Mulder. And that was wrong, because you're representing not only Celtic, but you're representing the fans at that point, and the fans that have actually travelled over to the European. I know you've been on loads of European away days, Colin. You know, the dedication of fans that go across all over Europe to watch the team and to behave like that, I thought was an absolute disgrace. And I think that his behaviour and his performances under Ronnie Deila is the reason why he was never played under Brendan Rodgers. And it's unfortunate for him, because when you look at the goals he scored and the times and the successes that he enjoyed, but also the relationship that him and Lisa Haig had with the Celtic support, it was a very strong bond, wasn't it? I mean, Lisa Haig has appeared on a Celtic State of Mind talking about how Celtic have impacted her life and the lives of their children. So I find that a bit sad, and always hope that these types of players come back around, because I know Andy Walker's a Celtic fan, and I know Charlie Nicholas is a Celtic fan, and I know that during his time in Glasgow that Chris Commons became a Celtic fan. He might have a Derby County tattoo. You know, that's what saddens me, because we've spent the last 5 minutes talking about that rather than his performances, but that's what happens when you're in the public eye, standing alongside another Chris who's got even less clue about football and punditry. But that's unfortunate. I don't think he's going to win this vote, as I think, in summary, is what I'm trying to say. But who's the fourth choice for midfielder of the decade?
There's been quite a few Celtic players that I'd say definitely would find themselves miffed if they weren't nominated for this. But it comes to a point where you've got to narrow it down. And when you really narrow it down, you realise that there's players there that are really special. And although they may be underappreciated at times, their influence within the team certainly can't be denied. And the player that we're looking at here is Callum McGregor. 274 appearances, 49 goals. Again, if he decides that Celtic is the team for him and he wants to stay here, he'll go on and make over 500 appearances. He'll go on and score over 100 goals. And again, he is undoubtedly one of the best players in Scottish football right now. He does the job that at times not a lot of people realise that he's done it. He's kind of building the plays together. He's making that pass that sets up the pass, that sets up the goal. He's not the player that's assisting all the time, but he's the engine room of the midfield. And I think if you're looking for Scott Brown's eventual replacement, he's already there. I think Callum McGregor could go on and really replace Scott Brown. I would be annoyed if he wasn't considered alongside the captaincy when Scott Brown eventually gives it up, because he's that good and he's that influential to the team. And it just shows that last year he was awarded the Player of the Year and the Players' Player of the Year, so the players appreciate what he does. I think the fans appreciate what he does. And certainly one of the better midfielders I've seen over my time watching Celtic.
I think he's a natural replacement for captain. His consistency is incredible, particularly when you look at the amount of games that he's played, Colin. And he was a player that came into the Celtic side very late in modern times. If you look at his age, he was 21 when he made his debut for Celtic. Yep. And the thing with Callum McGregor is that there was a question over his development as a young player. He was playing alongside Andy Robertson at Celtic, who famously was released, everybody knows that. But there was also a question mark over McGregor at that point. I think the McGregor we see today is a different player and a different beast from the one that played under Ronnie Deila, who came into the team. He almost, you know, if you think back, I mean, he scored a lot of important goals. He liked a goal in Europe, did McGregor, and he used to play the game differently, completely differently, and he was always jinking about as well. That's all been completely changed. My only concern, because I would love to see him remaining at the club and becoming, like James Forrest, a one-club man, my only concern is I think there has probably already been, you know, interest or an approach from Brendan Rodgers down south, and that would be my biggest concern for Callum McGregor. I would hope that he would stay and be that man who makes all those appearances and takes over from Bruni. But as we know, in the modern game, these things are never as simple as that, especially when money comes into play. But we shall see once we get back to whatever normality is going to be, Colin. Interesting choice, actually, of the four. Who would get your vote?
See, this is a hard one. As you say, there's four very good candidates. You got to include, I know we kind of slagged them for a couple of minutes there, but Chris Commons is a very, very good candidate. He was a fantastic player for Celtic under what was sort of a kind of transitional period. Scott Brown's going to win. He'll be captain of this decade of dominance. He'll already get in the team. So my thinking is I'm not going to vote for him there. I would probably go for James Forrest.
Good choice. I'm going to go for Scott Brown, because I think what we've seen in the development of Brown, and he's came through a lot of adversity on a personal level, but he's also, you think for a moment, Colin, you think for a moment, like we put this podcast out and thousands of people criticise us. It would affect you, absolutely no doubt. Or if you write an article, or if I write a book, or if I appear live on stage interviewing somebody and there are thousands of people saying that you're dreadful at your job, that is what footballers put up with on a day-to-day basis. And I know that they've got the trappings of the lifestyle and all that, but they've only got that not only because of their ability, because of their dedication as well to their craft over a number of years. And Scott Brown has had a level of abuse not seen since Neil Lennon played for Celtic. And I think that's one thing that they've got in common. And he has managed that abuse, that level of abuse, at every stadium he goes to in Scotland. In Scottish football, he's managed it. And not only has he managed it, he has come through it as a modern day legend. I've used that twice talking about the midfielders. So there's no doubt in my mind that Forrest and Brown are Celtic legends. So he'll get my vote.
What would be great would be for Scott Brown to sort of rub it into his critics is when he gets given that 9th trophy, and when this kind of dies down a wee bit, well, you still can go out and do this because the takeaways are still open. I'd love to see Scott Brown with a Premier League trophy sitting outside of a kebab shop in Edinburgh, eating a kebab in one hand and the Scottish Premiership trophy in the other hand, and that should be the picture that we use for 9 in a row.
Why Edinburgh? Come back to Fife, Scott. There's a great chippy in Oakley, and he's a good Celtic fan. All right, it's called Hilario's, so come there and you can get your kebab for there. There we go. That's a good idea. Right, let's move on to the...
What's the opening hours? How much is a fish up?
It used to be Eddie Ferrari's, but now it's owned by the Ciccarellas, so it's a good Italian chippy. Get up there. Right, there you go. They're not even paying for that advertisement. Right, strikers. Strikers, let's move on. This is going to be interesting because we've had some tremendous strikers over the last 10 years. Let's have a talk through the 4 in the list.
Definitely, and the first one I want to start with is, for me, a guy that was a penalty box genius, and it's Gary Hooper. 138 games, 82 goals. It felt like 138 goals because he just always seemed to pop up at the right time. He was always in the right space. Something I've noticed, certainly watching Celtic this season, and you highlighted it earlier, guys like Jeremy Frimpong are an attacking fullback who get right down to the byline and then want to cut it back. And we kind of have strikers now that don't seem to hang about the 6-yard box. If you watch some of the games back from this season, the amount of times that a ball was cut back and you're just screaming for Gary Hooper to be on the end of it because he wouldn't have missed. He was always in the right place. I think the moment, if you think about it, is the game at St Mirren when he scored basically in the last minute. He was in the right place at the right time, and that just seemed to be part of Gary Hooper's career. And don't get me wrong, he still did score some good goals from the edge of the box, outside the box, and he scored 5 goals against Hearts on the day that we lifted the trophy in 2012, and that won him the league's top goal scorer award. But it's a part of Celtic's attacking play that I feel has never been replaced, and it's that guy that will hang around the box.
Poacher. Yeah.
He'll be a rebound artist, and to me, he was just absolutely outstanding. It was a shame what's happened to his career, and when the opportunity for him to potentially have came back there in the summer was open, I wouldn't have been against him coming back. Yeah,
Gary Hooper, definitely a Neil Lennon signing, not one of these guys who was scouted elsewhere, and he flourished at Celtic. I think it gets to the point, Fraser Forster left and became a World Cup England player. Gary Hooper left and his career was on a downward trajectory thereafter, and that's a warning sign. But it comes down to the player's ability and performances. Number 2 on your list is our current striker, Mr. Leigh Griffiths. What would you say about Griff?
Leigh Griffiths has been fantastic, scoring 40 goals one season to basically almost, according to some fans, having his career ended, to then come back, and he was basically getting back to his best before this all happened. 231 appearances, 115 goals. I think he'll stay at Celtic now for another couple of seasons as well, and he could go on and make 150 goals quite easily because he is very similar to what we were saying about Chris Commons, a guy that will take a shot on, and for all the great play that we see with close control, someone to just take a shot, it can change a game. And Leigh Griffiths has certainly done that for us.
I spoke at length. There's a whole podcast dedicated to Leigh Griffiths with Alan Morrison. I'm a huge fan. It's brilliant to see him back. He definitely will score 150 goals, and he's a guy that's scored wherever he's played. The only downside of this particular vote is he's up against the two Frenchmen, Moussa Dembele, Odsonne Edouard. Talk to us about these two geniuses.
Oh, I mean, could you imagine if we'd got a season of them two playing together? All goal scoring records would have been broken. Moussa Dembele, I mean, do you remember when we played Rangers in the first game, the infamous Joey Barton game, and we were all gutted that the fact that Lee Griffiths was missing it and Moussa played? He went on and scored a perfect hat-trick. What would it have been if Griff had played, you know? And we only got to see 2 years of Moussa. We've seen a bit more of Odsonne, and both of them have went on to make such iconic moments for Celtic. Again, they'll probably go on and be the forward line for France in the future going forward. Both of them scored over 50 goals for the club. Both of them will go down as modern day great players. Of the two, who would I say is better? As an overall footballer, I would say Odsonne Edouard. As a goal scorer, Moussa Dembele.
What I would say, Colin, is that there has been some doubt cast on Twitter in relation to Celtic's sell-on fee for Moussa Dembele. I can confirm that Celtic do have a sell-on fee for Dembele. I can't confirm what the percentage is, but we do have one. So thanks for another £6 or £7 million, Moussa. I'm pretty sure it will help us over the next few months. Who would get your vote out the four, though?
You said it at the start, this is very, very hard. This will be the tightest, I think. I would have to go with the player that I would say has been the best Celtic striker overall, or the best player since Henrik Larsson's been here. I'll go with Odsonne Edouard.
I'll go with Dembele, just to level that up. But it would be much better if we could get both of them. Colin, these votes are going to be a series of polls that will be run on axrom.net. We'll run them on the social media channels as well. And we will put them towards the team of the decade. But we're looking for a goalkeeper, defender, midfielder and striker of this incredible decade of dominance which we are still living through. Colin, have a wee think about how we're going to celebrate 9 in a row, pal. It's going to be over the next few days. I'm sure there's going to be an announcement.
I think it would be good if we could maybe get some of the listeners to join in and see how we'll be celebrating. As long as we don't worry about having so many grey hairs or long hairs. I'm sure you're starting to look like a 70s music star now.
Who, me? No, I'm alright at the moment. Hey, that's what Hooders are for, mate. And I've also done a few tutorials on YouTube how to cut your own hair, so I'm fine. So listen, Colin, thanks again for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you next week for the decade of dominance.
Yeah, take care, stay safe, guys, and we'll see you next week. Hail, hail.